Hello, everyone. This is Jeffery Giesener, coming to you from the Obligation of Memory podcast network for the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group on Facebook and YouTube. We're continuing our interview with Mark Newhouse, author of The Devil's Bookkeeper, a trilogy of interesting stories from Mark's past. He's won major awards for his work and his writing. We just realized through the last interview that he was the top educator in secondary schools in the state of New York. And we're now going to be discussing in this episode all about Mark. And so, Mark, we're going to start off by telling you to tell us how you met your first wife. And I already know that you have had a marriage. You had a divorce, you had another marriage, which has lasted a long, long time, and you have two children. So we're going to really get into all of this now. So I'd like to kind of understand, you went from, you're in school teaching. When did you meet your first wife, and how did you meet your first wife?
First wife, her name is Paula. She's a wonderful, wonderful person. And I had always said that I did not want to get divorced. Okay, because my father and my mother had a very stormy marriage. I think part of the reason why I ended up divorced was because I went straight from my mother's apartment and being in college where I didn't go away to getting married. And I don't think I was prepared to live on my own. I was also raised by my father, who had very different ideas about how women should be treated. I don't want to say that he was European, but I think that it was a common European trait that women had to be dependent on the man. And he sort of was ashamed that my mother wanted to work and wanted to drive. And being raised with that idea, it doesn't make you a very good candidate for marriage. And I was very immature, and I didn't know what I was doing. I met Paula when I was one of the leaders of the teenage congregation in Whitestone, Queens. At one time, I wanted to be a rabbi. There are many things I wanted to be. I had a rabbi who was an amazing speaker and who was just a wonderful person. And I was always looking for a father figure. And he was one of the people who I gravitated toward. At any rate, I would go to the teenage services and I would sing, and I loved singing. To this day, I love singing, the prayers. And at the Passover Seder, I'm always the loudest singer. At any rate, she was 4 years younger than me. And she would always be someone who would come up to me every Sabbath and say, "Good Shabbos." And I sort of knew she liked me, but I never thought of her as someone I would, be interested in. But as we got older, things changed. And after a while, we started dating, and I found she was a wonderful person. And so I thought we would be happily married. But unfortunately, I think my reasons for getting married were not the best. And so the marriage lasted about 7 years. We did have a son. And I have to say that after she married a Scottish Jew, of all things, and I married again, and we both got married at the same year, the same summer. Huh. And I married a girl who was from England, and Linda has a wonderful English accent, and we are married 40 wonderful years on the 4th of July. Right. And what I tell people is that she's only 4'11" tall, but if she had been a general in the English army, we'd still be a colony. And what I always tell them is that I lost my independence on Independence Day to a Brit, of all things, and it's been fireworks ever since.
That's a great story. So tell me a little bit about your son. How old is he from your first marriage?
My oldest son is named Joshua David, and he is a teacher, and he is 43 years old. Huh. And I have to say that Linda and my ex-wife and her husband and we were a team. It's funny because when it was time for his bar mitzvah, we had it at a catering hall, and the caterer came over to us and he said, he said, I've had many, many couples divorced, but I've never seen a family that worked together so well, for a bar mitzvah.
So you met, I'm sorry, your second wife, and her name is Linda, right? So you met Linda,
Yeah.
and how does that story talk? How does that story progress?
Someday I'm going to write this story, Jeff. What actually happened was, as I said, I didn't want to get divorced. So I decided to take a break from marriage, and I moved into a singles complex of all things. And someday I promise I'm going to write this story. Anyway, I was there 2 weeks, and I met a guy who happened to graduate from Queens College a year before I did. So he asked me if I wanted to meet women. So I said, sure, why not? So we made it.
How old are you now?
I was, let's see, I was 32.
Okay.
So anyway, actually, I think I was 30, but he took me to a place where he said we could meet women. It was a political rally, and there was really no one there. So afterwards, he said, well, I'm going to take you someplace else. So he took me to a place called the Hounds and Foxes on Long Island. And I can't believe you're making me tell this story. Anyway, we go in there, and he loses me. And when I finally find him, he's with 3 women he met. And so I thought he was really swift, and he had met these women on his own. And so one of them he went off with. Another guy came over and took the other one. And believe it or not, I got stuck with this little 83-pound woman, 4'11" tall, and I'm 5'10.5". And I'm stuck with her. And I asked her to dance, and surprisingly, she said she would dance with me. And about an hour after we started dancing, I realized she did not like me. And I did not like her at all. Why? Well, I was getting a stiff neck from dancing with someone that short. And you have to understand something. I thought for sure that I was going to be going back to my former life. I thought I needed a break. So I really wasn't looking for anyone to get involved with. But just my luck, God put this little character, into my life 2 weeks after I'm separated.
Bashir. They call it Bashir.
Yes, and it was. But I will tell you, it wasn't easy, because what happened was at the end of the evening, I had a terrible headache and I had a stiff neck from dancing with her. And I thought to myself, I'm never going to see her again, but I'm going to be polite. So I asked her for her phone number. And this little thing is standing in front of me. And I'm thinking I'm being polite. I hadn't dated in 10 years. Okay. So I'm thinking it's the polite thing to do. So I said to her, I had a very nice time. May I have your phone number? And she looks me in the eye and says to me, my last name is Browett. Look me up in the book. And she walked away from me. And I said to myself, never again will I speak to this person.
Okay, so you can't leave us at this, hanging this out with this hanging nail story. And I wish Linda would add, you're talking about Linda without Linda being able to talk for herself. So you got to give us the skibbies on how this all connected.
All right, I'm going to tell you, but I don't want you to hold it against me. All right. I had met someone else.
That's me, but I can't speak for the whole audience that are listening.
Okay. I had a date with someone else who canceled the date. And, divorce, well, I wasn't divorced. I was separated. But I was going through really a very serious traumatic time in my life. My childhood wasn't easy. And this was devastating to me. I consider myself a failure. The only thing that really kept me going was my love of teaching and the affection I was getting from my students. You know, you said before I was a high school teacher. Well, I did teach high school, but what I really loved was teaching sixth grade and elementary school. I called myself the oasis for these kids before they went to junior high school and high school.
Mhm.
And there was some wonderful teaching going on. And I really felt this was what was saving me. Well, at any rate, at the middle of the week, I realized that I didn't have a date for Saturday night. So I called my friend up and I said to him, you remember that woman I was dancing with? Now, I thought Linda was 19 years old because she was 83 pounds, she was tiny, and she was very cute, but she was nasty to me. Anyway, I thought to myself, this is someone who is safe. There's no way on earth I'm going to have a relationship with this person. So I said to my friend, I said, by any chance, do you remember the name of the girl I was dancing with? And he said, you mean Linda? And I said, you know her? And he goes, yeah, she's one of the nicest people I know. She works at the bank a few blocks away from where we're living. And I go, oh no, I couldn't believe it. So I said to him, would you do me a favor, go to the bank and find out her last name for me, and I'll look it up. Because I figure there's no way I'm gonna have a relationship with this woman. It's safe. So he goes to the bank and he asks her for her phone number. So now I'm in a real problem situation. Do I call her? If I don't call her, she knows that he asked for the phone number. Well, I finally decided to call her. And what I didn't tell you was that the night we were together, she had a friend with her at this discotheque who had come from England. And so the two of them were there in this discotheque. Well, it was a friend who picked up the phone. And she gets into a huge argument with me of all things about my name. She accused me of saying that my name was Bob instead of Mark. And for 10 minutes, I'm arguing with her. And I should have hung up. But again, God told me, don't hang up. Well, I'm arguing with her about my name. And suddenly she says, Linda, there's someone here who says his name is Mark, but lied to you and told you his name was Bob. So Linda gets on the phone and she says, who is this? And I said, it's Mark. And she starts arguing with me. And she says, why did you tell me your name was Bob? And this goes on for 10 minutes. So I don't know why I didn't hang up. Okay, I really don't know why, but I didn't. And the next thing I know, I said to her, look, I would like to take you out, dancing or something like that, or for dinner. And she surprised me and said, yes. And so we were supposed to go out. And then she called me up the night before and she canceled. And I figured, okay, that's it, we're done. You want to hear the rest?
Of course, you can't leave that. You can't leave me here.
Well, what happened was she told me that she was in her parents' house. Now, remember, I thought she was 19, okay? And the house was burglarized. And the crooks had broken her parents' sliding doors. Well, they aroused a protective instinct in me. And so I said to her, well, why don't I come over and keep you company? Well, what I didn't realize was that she was going to give me the world's worst set of directions to her house. It took me an hour and a half to get there. And when I tell you I was beschwitzed, I had bought myself, when I went to the discotheque, I was dressed like a Boy Scout because I didn't plan to go to a discotheque. And I didn't have any silk shirts and I didn't have any chains and things. Well, when I went to this date, I went shopping. I bought a silk shirt for myself with all these flowers on it. I was wearing a chain around my neck, which happened to have a mezuzah on it. I'm wearing a bracelet on my wrist. and I'm wearing boots, and I show up to her house after an hour and a half, sweating bullets. Okay. And it was the worst date I ever had in my life. She cooked hamburgers for us, and the hamburgers went from juicy and tempting, because I hadn't had a barbecue in months, to hockey pucks about the size of a nickel. Then we're sitting in the backyard, and and all of a sudden a bird flies over us, and it hits her, drops a bomb on her that lays on her head, drops onto her forehead, down her nose. And this sweet little English thing looks at me, and I'm looking at her, and she says to me, "Will you excuse me a moment?" She disappears, comes back in a brand new blouse, and says to me, "Can we sit on the deck?" So this is the topper of all toppers. We're sitting on the deck, and her parents come home from being away in upstate New York. And they're a wonderful English couple, but they don't know me from Adam. Her father comes in, very stocky man, and he looks at me. And Linda says, "I have good news for you and bad news for you." And he looks at me and he says, "I see the bad news. What's the good?" And she says, "We've been burglarized again." And he goes, "That's better," and walks away.
What a great story. You have to write this story. So I
And
want to,
I will.
we can keep going here, but I want to kind of right turn this to go back to your son and ask your son, you have two sons. What's your second son? What is his name and what is he doing?
His name is Keith. And he is a instructional designer for a major publishing company. And he's also taken over my publishing company, which I started a number of years ago when I first retired from teaching. And he's made it, very quite successful.
How old is he?
Keith is 38 years old.
Okay. So now I'm going to go back and say, okay, were your parents still living when you had your children?
Yes, my parents were still living. I will tell you that they both were very unhappy when I married Linda. When I told them I was going to get married to Linda. For Holocaust survivors, I think it was difficult for them to accept that I was marrying, after being married to a Jewish woman, a wonderful person, that I was now marrying a non-Jew. And they had a very difficult time of it. My father threatened to disown me.
So, but I'm going to go back to your children. What are your memories that, if they were here with us, what would they remember about you growing up with your parents, their grandparents?
They really don't know very much about my parents.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, my father was a very difficult human being. Okay. His second marriage broke up after 20 years as well. And he had a second family, he had two children. And because he was so difficult, my children never really got to know him very well. And I've always sort of regretted that, but it was also partly because I can't go into it in too much depth, but there were a lot of issues that made him not exactly the best, person for them to get to know.
Okay, so
they knew about.
All right, how about your mother?
My mother, as I said, was a survivor. And after she divorced my father, she had to take care of herself for 20 years. After she married a wonderful man, a Holocaust survivor from Sosnowiec in Poland, she finally became happy, but she moved to Florida. So we were still in New York. So my kids did not really see her very much either, which is unfortunate. You have to remember something. I was older when I had the children.
Mm-hmm.
I was already.
Any communications on the phone? Any lessons learned from the phone? Anything that kind of comes to mind?
Very, very rarely. Okay. And they never talked about the Holocaust. As I said, my parents never spoke to me much about it.
Okay.
We,
Sometimes
you
it does.
know,
Sometimes it does skip generations, and that's where I was kind of heading. Whether your children had anything in there. But I'm going to ask you about Linda. You have a great story about how you met. Now, if Linda was here, and she maybe is within earshot, the question I would ask her about you is, what is it like to marry a second generational survivor? And if you could speak for Linda, or we can hear Linda off in the background, I'd be interested to hear a response to this.
the first time we realized that we had a major difference between us was when she invited me to a wake. And the wake was an open casket. Now, I'm a Kohen, which for those people who may not know, means that I'm a descendant of the high priest. And we're not, of Aaron, and we're not supposed to be exposed to a dead body. So anyway, I had never seen a corpse before. And I said to Linda, I said, when I die, I really would not want an open coffin. And she asked me a question. She said, well, how did Jews get buried? And I said, well, we believe that we go with what we came. If you're a traditionalist, you go in a biodegradable box and you go in a shroud. So she said, you mean you're naked? And I said, well, that's basically true. So later that night, she said to me, you know, Mark, she said, when we go to heaven, are you going to talk to me? I said, what do you mean? She says, well, you're going to be naked, but I'm going to be in my best Sunday dress. That's probably been the biggest religious difference between us. She's very aware of my past. She knows how much I feel about Judaism. One of my problems has always been I'm extremely sensitive to hypocrisy. I don't believe a person can be religious and be a stunk. And so I've always set that kind of a example for my children. When I said in school that I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't take drugs, I don't gamble, I live that kind of life. I practice what I preach. And I think that's something very important for Linda, because she knows that my sense of religion is that God is good with an extra O missing. And I have a tremendous tolerance for all religions and for all people.
So I'll ask you about your two children. What do they think about growing up with a second generation home?
My oldest son married a very nice Jewish girl, and they have a Jewish home. And he's very aware of my Holocaust, upbringing. Again, like myself, he did not know the specifics. Okay, I can't say he's very involved in researching it, but he's very aware of it.
Has he read your book?
He read the first book, and he had some comments about it. He was a middle school librarian. And he said the book was not appropriate for middle schools. And we got into a major argument because I said it was not written for middle schools. He reacted very strongly to the fact that I have a very tender love scene in the book. But the book is a love story. And I felt I had to include that to give it the sense of reality that it was needed.
And how about your second younger son? How does he feel growing up in a second generation house?
You're right. Keith was raised with a respect for all religions. And I will tell you that my father would never let me sit on Santa Claus's lap. I had a girlfriend when I was about, 6 years old. who had a Christmas tree, and she invited me to her house, and I was playing with trains around her Christmas tree. And my father was not happy with that at all. Um, my son, my oldest son, Josh, he used to come to the house and we celebrated Hanukkah, we celebrate Christmas. And when he got older, one day he said to me, Dad, he said, we're Jewish. Why do we celebrate Christmas? And that was a tough time for me. And I said to Josh, I said, you know, Josh, Linda is not Jewish, and I love Linda. So we share all our holidays together.
Now, do you have any grandchildren?
Well, I do have two grandchildren who are being raised in the Jewish faith.
Mhm.
One was bar mitzvah and did a wonderful job at his bar mitzvah. And the other one is a little girl. And I don't know if she's going to be bat mitzvah, but they're being raised in the Jewish faith, and they have a wonderful upbringing. And I hope someday they'll understand their full history. They're too young now to fully understand it.
Now, are they living where?
They are now living in Massachusetts.
And
They
your,
were living in Florida.
and your other son?
Keith lives in Orlando,
Mhm.
and
And
Keith,
where are you? In Florida?
we're in the villages in Florida.
Okay.
Okay, we moved here in 2002.
Okay. So we're getting close to the end of our third episode. And really what I want to do and let everyone know that our fourth episode will be really talking about the wonderful the Devil's Bookkeeper trilogy, and a lot of interesting how-tos during that session. But I want to leave with the idea of, do you see in yourself some of the trauma that your parents had? And do you see it in yourself? And do you see it now looking back at your older, adult two males? Do you see them having similar trauma that they're passing on to their children?
This is a tough question. When I was a kid, I was bullied, I was abused, and I also had this Holocaust as this huge shadow over me. So the answer to that question is yes, I was traumatized. Many children could laugh at their past. They had grandparents they could talk to. I did not have those things. Linda and my ex-wife were both loved and both the center of their families. And in Linda's, I envied Linda. I always sort of was looking for a father figure, and Linda's father was someone I was very close to, someone I could really relate to. And I think that's something that's been, missing from me. And with my kids, I always said that when I was raising them, I would do the exact opposite of what my father would have done to solve a problem. I didn't believe in corporal punishment. I didn't spank. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I didn't go into rages. Okay. Was I traumatized by the Holocaust? Absolutely. I was terrified of it, which is one of the reasons why I did not do the research I should have done.
But does that trauma identify in your children?
I don't think so. Okay. They know of their past. They know about the Holocaust. But when I talk about it with them, I try and when I write about it, I try and use it as a lesson to encourage tolerance, hope for peace, and love. The thing that bothers me the most, I think, is that I see so much of it happening today. There's just too much hate. My kids don't hate. My kids love. And I think that's a lesson that has to be taught.
Now, I asked about your older son reading your book, and what about your younger son? Has he read your book?
He read part of it. Okay. What did they say? A prophet is not appreciated in their own home, or something of that nature. The hardest thing for me to do is get my family to read my books, which is one of the reasons, it's one of the reasons why I joined writing groups.
Yeah. So how do you switch from writing children's books and and I think it's your book was the one with the B-E-E. What's the name of that book?
Which,
The one that starts with B-E-E.
oh, Be Ready for School, picture books.
Yeah, picture books. So how do you go from that to something as intense as the Holocaust? And I know you authored that book in 2020, so you're kind of in both. You have 2 feet in 2 buckets, right? You're sort of
Yeah,
in one place and not in the other. And I don't know how you deal with it and how you partition your head to be able
split
to.
personality. I'm a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. No, seriously. My children's books, I started writing children's books to serve my students. And almost all of my books were for good deeds, all right? This book was very different. I almost didn't write this book because honestly, I thought of myself as a children's book writer. And when I thought about writing this book, I said, I can't do this. When you're a bullied child and abused, you don't have much confidence. And I've always suffered from that lack of confidence. And I was very shy. And when I faced this task, I said, I can't do this. I didn't write this book to be published. I wrote this book for my children and for my grandchildren. And the fact that it got published, I think, was really an accident. It wasn't something I intended.
Okay, so we're going to leave it right there and invite everyone back to come to our 4th episode of the Obligations of Memory podcast for the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group on Facebook and YouTube. We're talking to the author, Mark Newhouse. We're talking about how he switched from being a children's author, well, not really switched, but how he took on the task of writing about his Holocaust memoirs in the book, The Trilogy, The Devil's Bookkeeper. So we're going to come right back to episode 4 and stay tuned, and we'll see you soon.